Okay. So thank you everybody for coming. It's a topic that is getting a little bit more prevalence in the media these days, and people are taking more note of the problem with mold and associated problems, health problems, things of this nature. Some of the things are starting to leak into the real estate side of things. I mean, it's obviously a concern when somebody is looking at a home, whether that home has mold in it. Is there a problem with it prior to sales, or a problem with it after sales? So it's important to talk about it and to understand how important it is becoming in that transaction. So I thought to begin with this presentation, we talk about mold and really just so you understand a little bit about it and some of its characteristics. Morning. Hello. So.
Morning, guys.
You can sit here.
Somewhere. Here, there.
Hey, that spot looks good. How are you? We brought some friends too.
A few?
I just texted.
Yes.
Texted.
Wow, really good.
How are you? Get some of this, right?
Okay, so just
You over.
you want to start again?
Sure.
Take two.
And I have some material for you if you'd like. So thank you very much. Okay, so my name is Robert Offenbacher. I am a certified mold inspector remediator, as well as asbestos abatement, involved with that, and a licensed general contractor. So and indoor air analysis testing as well, certification in that. So. The reason why I thought that this makes sense is to start talking a little bit more about mold and its relationship with people's health, and from a standpoint of real estate transaction itself, and some of the implications of a home that you find that would have mold in it. These days, people are becoming more aware of it. It's a bigger health problem. It's becoming, well, they say it's becoming the new asbestos. I don't know about that, but it is a fairly serious health concern and can affect you adversely. So today I own a company called Maple Leaf Mold, and that's what we do: testing, remediation, removal, as well as asbestos, and indoor air quality testing. So that's my side of things. And as alluded to earlier, I'm also a licensed general contractor with another company that I have in Toronto. But my focus today is on mold and asbestos and indoor air quality. So thought we'd just talk about what mold really is. It's just a simple plant-like organism that it exists everywhere in nature. I mean, you walk outside, you're exposed to mold. In the winter, it is much lower the levels than it is in the spring or the fall. Those are the two times of year that mold is significantly increased in numbers. So they're nature's recyclers. They break down complex materials into simple compounds. Without them, we'd be up to here in stuff that needs to be broken down. So it needs to be addressed, and mold fits that signature. Not all molds are bad. They're responsible for some cheeses, fermented beverages, and antibiotics, penicillin. Penicillin itself, when you look at it closely under a microscope, it resembles dead on to a black mold type of species called Aspergillus. So they're very hard to tell apart. So when you see them in a lab report, they'll report them usually together. They're so similar. One is good, one is not so good. So here's typically what a mold structure would look like under a microscope. Very similar to a flower, a plant, giving off spores. And this is just the stalk of the mold itself. These are only maybe about 3 microns in size. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of an inch. Very, very small. You cannot see it, but it is in the air.
And this is a little worm just by itself?
This is like a plant stalk. It has
So the other end of it, nothing?
The other end is going into like a moist, wet area, or its source of food. So mold needs 3 things to grow. It needs moisture, it needs organic material, similar to what's on the back of drywall, wood, cellulose, cardboard, whatever, and warmth. It needs those 3 things to begin to work. It becomes active, releasing spores similar to this into the air. Those spores are then usually spread just through air currents inside a house, sucked into an HVAC system, and then circulated throughout a home. Now, typically, when that happens, it won't really grow again unless it has a moist area to begin to grow again. So you'll see if there's a problem with mold in a basement, get into the circulatory system, and you'll see more mildew in a bathroom upstairs, right, or on the surface of a ceiling where there's condensation. You'll start to see little things like that that give it away that there's a mold problem, damp smell in a basement, things of this nature. If you go into any basement and you smell that, there's an issue with mold right away. You know that there's a problem. There's a reason for that smell. It's given off by a mycotoxin, which is what comes off these spores. And mycotoxins, the spores themselves, use it to prevent competition amongst one another, but it's not good for us. It's not very good at all.
How long does it take a mold to, once there's moisture and a source of nutrient, to form to a level that would be hazardous to health?
It depends on the species. So some molds will set up within 24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
Some will take 7 to 12 days. There's one called Stachybotrys, which is probably the worst one that you're going to run into. It takes between 7 and 12 days to set up. It's defined sometimes as black mold, but it does come in different colors. But it is there's a problem with it.
If you have an area that has limited air circulation,
Yes.
does mold seem to grow faster with or without?
It will grow faster in those particular sort of circumstances. However, you still need to have a higher relative humidity in the home in order for that to happen. So it does need moisture to grow. So if it's very, very dry in your home, you shouldn't have a problem. So that's why we always recommend you keep something a few inches away from a wall, allow for that circulation. And your fan in your home should be on 24 hours a day, just circulating air. Right, that will help prevent a lot of molds as well.
Robert, are there any extra copies of the presentation? Some people are asking.
There's one here.
There's one
Oh,
there.
okay.
I have one of my own
Okay,
here.
thank
Someone
you.
we can give.
Okay. Also, this is our sign-in sheet.
Yes, that's
If
true.
you haven't signed in,
Thank you.
please sign in and pass it. Thank you very much.
Certainly, and I'd certainly like to email any copies of this presentation as well to people if they don't have it. I have cards over here, and over there for my. Thank you very much. Okay, so to survive, mold needs moisture, organic material like wood, paper, cardboard to use as food, and warmth. If levels of mold inside a home are higher than outside, the health of individuals inside that home or business are at risk. So the line of thinking was until recently that about 20 to 24% of people are unusually susceptible to exposure to mold spores. That has changed. That is now, they're indicating that you cannot tell how you're being affected by mold. So you're affected by mold subtly as well as overtly. So there's a lot of things that are just coming to light right now.
Are there any similar kind of characteristics or traits to look out for if someone's affected by mold?
I'm sorry?
Are there any kind of common symptoms or characteristics that come up if someone's affected by
Runny nose is a big one. It seems like allergies along those lines, rashes, things of those nature. You'll see, I'll have some of the things you can look for, and some of the upper respiratory issues, asthmas that people run into now. That's a big problem. So left unchecked mold will grow and proliferate very quickly. It will not go away on its own. It will go dormant. It's either live or dormant. It may stop growing if it runs out of moisture. Those spores will still circulate through the air. They'll still cause allergy issues. So water incursion, water coming into a home is the big one, right? That's really the problem that we see. Usually you'll see leaks in a basement, leaks from a roof, leaks from under a sink, in a kitchen, something along those lines. Slowly over time that water will drip, say in a kitchen cabinet with a sink, and it slowly reaches the back where there's a wood underneath there, and it slowly starts to grow. Your level of mold spores in the air starts to rise accordingly. So possible causes, as I said, leaks from roofs, around window frames, foundations, plumbing leaks, HVAC system malfunctions, sprinkler activations, condensation in attic spaces. Condensation in attic spaces is a big one. A lot of people don't have an adequate insulation in their attic, and as a result, moisture as defined as water vapor in the air will travel through that insulation to the attic space. That warm, moist air from your home will reach the underside of the sheathing of the roof above, condense, and there's your food source, there's your water, and there's your warmth. It starts to grow underneath. Yes?
If you steam from a shower, if you don't have a proper vented washroom, is that a big problem?
It is if it vents into the attic.
So just, let's say you didn't have proper circulation, you just open the door and,
Right, so we,
the house.
it is something that you should look into. We certainly would address that with an exhaust fan. And if you can't, you leave the door open and the window open for about half an hour. And that will vent out that moisture.
And what about just running a humidifier?
A dehumidifier will work. It depends on the type of.
A humidifier, so if you're trying to get some water in the air.
Right. I think you have to look at the size of the room, the humidifier, what its capacity is, and look at how much of water vapor you're putting into the air. You should have a hygrometer at home. If you don't, it just measures relative humidity in the air. You want to keep it between 30 and 50%, somewhere in there. So if you do have a humidifier, make sure that level stays between the level of relative humidity in your home stays within that level. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
I have a question.
Oh, sir.
If you, have mold in, say, your laundry room area,
Yes.
and you didn't know.
Yes.
Okay, just like you find the washing machine and dryer. Excuse me,
Bless you.
and then, but your bedroom was at the other side.
Yes.
So, would that affect you over time? Like we didn't discover the mold of, we sold a family property
Mhm.
last winter, and the home inspector came in from the other side, from the buyer.
Yes.
And he found the mold.
Right.
So we didn't even know.
Yes.
So,
Again, in situations like that, usually if you see it, it's the tip of the iceberg. Usually there's more going on in behind
yeah. there
that
was.
visible patch, right?
Yeah.
Usually
Oh, yeah.
that's what I see. So it is a health risk.
Yeah, so then, I don't know, when you have an older property or even a newer property, checking periodically, once a year for mold.
You should have it looked at, yes.
But in a new house, you don't have to worry about that.
New houses are much better. They're a little bit more airtight though. That's the problem with newer homes.
Yeah.
Right, so you don't get that ventilation of an older home. An older home will have cracks and things of this nature. You will get drafts and things of this nature that improve circulation and sort of inhibit mold growth inside a home.
Uh-huh.
The newer homes are more airtight with window seals and so on and so forth. So if you have mold in that home, it's going to stay in that home, circulate throughout your heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, then transmit through the whole home. So the problem that you have in the basement is really near a furnace typically, and will circulate through the. If it does not have a forced air system, typically they're so small they will float on air currents and usually rise to the warmest level in the home. So yeah.
On new construction, especially being built today,
Yes.
the roof vents,
Yes.
how do you know if there's enough or if it's not enough, or if the air is being circulated properly? Who designs it, and basically?
Right. So usually for a new home, the design itself will be reviewed by an engineer and an architect and then the city. So there are a number of checks and balances in place to ensure that there's adequate ventilation in a roof system. Right. Always recommend you look at that carefully. That is a good question. I know that sometimes there are not enough roof vents we see in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, I don't want to go off topic too much, but in a lot of cases what we see is that insulation in an attic has been pushed over top of, do you know what a soffit vent is? A soffit vent runs underneath the soffit and on both sides and allows for cross ventilation in an attic. Sometimes insulation will be pushed on it. That stops the ventilation, stops cross currents. Mold starts growing as a result. You have to have what's called a baffle, a soffit vent baffle that you put there to prevent insulation from going over top of it. So when houses, they look at topping up insulation, very important to look at those baffles and have them installed at the same time. So that, and they usually are higher, so they'll prevent that insulation from going into that soffit. Ridge vents are nice too, that run along the top peak of the roof. That would be nice to have if you can have it. And yeah, so okay. So mold and water. Mold cannot live without water, but spores can. They just remain dormant. Dormant molds are more prevalent and cause more of an allergy type effect. Live mold, more asthmas, more impactful upper respiratory problems, more significant health problems associated with live mold versus dormant. We both recommend you remove them. Remove both of those, live or dormant. Mold growth can typically begin within 24 to 48 hours of a water curve event. So you have say you have your flood on a hardwood floor. Not a good thing. You need to ventilate, dry out that floor quickly within 24 to 48 hours, before 24 to 48 hours. Suck up the moisture as much as you can from underneath that wood floor, and then put fans on it and get rid of the moisture as best you can. Wood floors, I find, are really bad from the standpoint of maintaining and resisting pulling water out. So you'll need an experienced dryer to come in, an experienced drying company with mats that they put on floors, suck up that water. Right? It's very, very important that it's reacted to quickly. A flood or anything like that needs to be addressed right away. You don't have a lot of time before mold starts growing, and you have a big problem.
How does a modern flooring material like vinyl plank flooring work? How do you have to dry that out? Does it seep underneath the planks?
Are you talking about like the laminate click flooring, things like that?
Correct.
Those are very difficult to dry.
Okay.
You may have to remove it to dry it.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's almost like a plastic.
Yeah.
it's plastic. Now the good thing is plastic, right? It's not organic.
Yeah, that won't rack, but it will stay underneath.
That stay underneath, and it depends where that water comes from. If it comes from outside, it's carrying its own organic material, dirt, viruses, bacteria, comes in, or sewage, carries its own organic material with water and warmth. It will grow underneath that plastic, and you won't even know it. So that's why it's important to remove it. You have to disinfect the entire concrete slab, and then you have to build it back up properly with a waterproof membrane on top before you put your flooring on top. Because sometimes concrete floors in basements, older homes, allow water vapor to come up through the ground underneath. So it's important. That's why we don't recommend carpeting, and you must have a waterproof membrane or water vapor membrane put down first, then your flooring. This water vapor is going to come up and destroy what you have or grow mold.
And is there any kind of antimicrobial
Yes.
layer that you can put before you put down the click floor?
We typically will spray it with a product called Benefect, Decon 30, which is a botanical. It is extracted from the herb thyme, and that will kill 99.99% of bacteria, viruses, and mold, and HIV. It's used in hospitals actually, and because it's a botanical, it's what we use. We want to make sure that it's safe. So yes, sorry.
Is that just for still water? What about moving water in a sump pump hole?
Okay, so we typically, when we see that, we do disinfect it as well. When we see it, there's not really much you can do. You will always have standing water there, but again, it's usually sealed. The sump pump is usually sealed, and if there's any gap, we certainly seal that as well.
You can see right in it.
Yeah, so there needs to be a cover. It needs to be
And
controlled.
even though it keeps moving, the mold can still grow there?
Yes.
Sorry, from this gentleman's question about the click flooring.
Yes.
And I guess laminate.
Yes.
If you're trying to dry out or dry up the floor, could you use alcohol to try to dry out?
To suck out the moisture or to.
It'll suck out the moisture and also fan it at the same time.
We don't recommend that. There are only certain things you can do in situations like that. Unfortunately, you're not left with many choices. We've looked at many different ways of trying to save floors. I don't like to take out floors and cause damage. We can save what we can.
Not to save the floor, just to try and just dry it out as much as possible.
We don't recommend it. You should remove it, and you need to dispose of that, unfortunately. So, any other questions at this time? No.
Is there a question?
No, I was gonna ask the stuff that you sprayed underneath, is that not toxic?
No, what we use is Benefect. Decon 30, in 30 seconds of dwell time in contact with that, it is extracted from the herb thyme. And there is nothing, I'll tell you a story. The representative for the company actually used to demonstrate his product by drinking a small amount of it. Yes, but it kills good and bad bacteria. So he
He's not with
he
them
stopped doing
anymore.
that. Look at that chaser.
What'd you say, Robert?
It's not with the company. No. But the product is very safe, and I can certainly provide you with that name. You can look it up. It's very good, and that's what we use throughout a home. We don't use anything else that we're concerned about.
Spray it on?
Pardon me?
You just spray it?
You spray it and you soak it. Like you have to soak the material that you're getting. If it's porous like wood, sometimes you have no choice but to remove it. Sometimes it can't be saved. Wood studs in a wall that have had water coming in from a foundation. Behind drywall, you've never seen it black
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
You have to cut it out and remove it, bag it, seal it in a contained chamber. And a contained chamber. So you have this contained chamber set up in the basement. Let's say the leak has happened there. Contain the chamber, you have a HEPA air scrubber. So this constantly runs while you're working down there, fully suited. And then you vent it outside. Creates a negative airspace in that basement. All the air in the home moves down into that space and is vented out, as opposed to you doing the work and getting out. We want to vent it out. We want to keep it contained. And you do the work, disinfect, and then what you do is you encapsulate. You mean you've got to lock in the dead mold that you've just killed. You've got to lock it in so it doesn't get into the airspace again. So there's two parts to a remediation. Removal of contaminated material and disinfection as well as encapsulation. 3 parts, pardon me.
So how bad is it for someone to live in a basement apartment where there's black mold behind it?
It depends on the individual. I wish I could tell you that everybody reacts the same, they don't. Some people live with it and they don't even notice it. Some people are affected. Usually they're very young, 2 years old or younger, very old. People with immune system compromised positions if they're exposed to that, they're certainly susceptible to further illness. There's some indication lately within the last couple of years that mold acts in tandem with an illness and exacerbates the effects of that illness. There's that. Neurologists have been associated with mold as well. A study in Cornell University. On my website I have about 60 or 70 posts on there that have various studies and various things that you can do and what you run into, mold in basements and so forth. So certainly there. So mold growth typically begins within 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours of water incursion. Prompt attention is essential. As I said, it's only a small, what you see is only a small part typically. So here is an example, it's hard to see, I'm sorry, but water's come down from a flood on the first floor into a basement ceiling. You can see what's going on in there. Usually you'll see this, but usually the mold is inside, in and around this area as well. So this is only a small part of what you see. So we have to cut that out and then clean everything out with a HEPA vacuum, disinfect everything and bag all the contaminated material, and then encapsulate it with an encapsulant chemical that locks it in. More problems. This was a kitchen area. In behind the cabinets, cabinets were removed. So this material here, this stud here would be removed. This is in the process of remediation right now. So we would remove